Ty and I met for 10 minutes. We barely.
But, we started because we could see the lives. So many of you marched in the streets with us for so long. And 14 years, a lot has happened. And we haven't lowered the Pentagon budget. Weapons are still being sold. But I just want to honor everybody in here that we continue the fight, no matter what they throw at us, and that's what's important, that we haven't lost heart. Peace and love still is the fire in our hearts. I have been blessed to be partnered with Medea. We have been pretty much all over the world, some pretty crazy places. And it's really beautiful to have such an amazing friendship and partnership when you're working at this level and when your heart's breaking every day and when we can look at each other and someone can pull the other back out of the hole so we can go back in. One of the things we learned together is when our hearts are broken, we just go pick up a banner and go outside and start yelling at somebody. Makes you feel so good. That's the core of Thursday. We're pretty angry. Let's get on the freeway with a freeway banner hanging tomorrow. That's what we hung last week on the 405. So now Medea's on her third Code Pink book tour. 100 cities at a time, I want you to know. She gets out there and really, what it is when she's out there on a book tour is to really nourish. Okay, you can do whatever you want.
Can you see me? Should I stand on a little thing here?
Yes. Stand on the table.
Oh. Not so box. Did that at the Republican convention. During Donald Trump's speech. Is this a little better?
Yay!
So it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you, Jodie, for all these years of great friendship and work together. And thank you to the Code Pink staff. And so many old friends from the LA area and new friends. It's really wonderful to be here. But it's also sad to be here because we really don't want to be doing this, right? It would have been wonderful if Code Pink could have come and gone very quickly because, right, Blaze and Teresa, we didn't need to keep doing this stuff. And Ty, remember your sign in Congress that they gave you such a hard time is I can't believe we're still protesting this shit. Kind of the generic sign we can take to anything. But it really is sad. And now then, of course, we don't really hear about all the bombings that are going on in the Middle East every single day, many of which we are doing. And so it's just violence, 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 and more violence. And when is this ever going to end? I remember coming here, it reminds me just being here now, a year after 9/11. It was the anniversary. And Robert Greenwald, Robert Greenwald with his great movies, he was doing some anniversary thing. And I had just come back from Afghanistan with some of the 9/11 family members, people who lost loved ones in 9/11. And we went to Afghanistan to meet with people who lost loved ones to our bombing, and came back to tell the stories of that. And that's a long time ago. And we're still in Afghanistan, and we're still bombing in Afghanistan. And just in this last month, we've been bombing in, name them out. Libya, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, Iraq, Gaza through
our weapons.
Pakistan too. So 7 countries just in the last month. And what has it led to? Has terrorism been erased? I mean, it's just led to more and more and more. The columnist Thomas Friedman, Some of you know him, and probably some of you like some of what he says and doesn't like some other things he said. But he had a great piece that was looking back at 9/11. And he said, let's look at the one country in the Arab world that actually has gotten something positive through the Arab Spring. And that was?
Tunisia.
Tunisia, right. And he said, Tunisia, the one place where the U.S. hasn't been. I thought that was such a brilliant observation. Everywhere where the U.S. goes, we just muck things up. And, at some point, when are we going to get this through the heads of the people who run this country? Well, when we're more effective as an anti-war movement. And so, while we have been trying all these years through Code Pink and other peace organizations, and thank the work of Jewish Voice for Peace and others who've been focusing on the U.S. support of Israel and how terrible that is for the Palestinians and how terrible it is for us. There is another country that the U.S. has been so friendly with, and you look around and there's no movement in the United States trying to do something about that one. And how many times have you been said, how come you're picking on Israel? What about these other terrible Arab countries? Well, you know what? Let's start picking on one of those terrible Arab countries, and that is Saudi Arabia. Important that we recognize as we do this work, it is not to feed into Islamophobia that is so rampant in the United States that Donald Trump is just spreading like a terrible disease. We can't fit into that. But you know what? The Wahhabism practiced by the Saudis is a distortion of the peaceful Islam that is practiced by the vast majority of people around the world. Right? And it really is a distortion of Islam that would have gone into the dustbin of history between Imam Wahhab back in the 1730s and the Saud family that just wanted to rape and pillage and found a good way to do it by justifying in the name of this crazy, intolerant version of Islam. It would have been destroyed had it not been for the discovery of oil. Right. So here we get this very toxic mix of the Wahhab family that wants to spread this version that his version is the only version of Islam, and anybody else who practices it in any other way is an infidel, and any other kind of religion is an infidel. And then you get the marauding Saudi family that wants to go and conquer and take and take and take. And then you get the Western world and the U.S. that says, oil, we need that oil. And so Chevron is the company that got the first concession and found oil beyond their biggest dreams. So we can tie that into ourselves here in California. And then the U.S. Said, okay, we're going to make a deal with these Saudis that you sell us the oil, and we will provide security, which means we will make sure that your intolerant kingdom does not go by the wayside, but stay conservative, democratic, Republican, 12 different administrations. The U.S. has stayed on the side of this Saudi regime. So what is this Saudi regime? Well, if you buy the book, you'll learn a lot about Saudi Arabia, because with the help of a lot of Saudi friends, I really dug into it and turned into it like a Q&A. It's sort of like a primer on the basic things you should know about Saudi Arabia. But some of the things I uncovered were just astounding, even to me, which is to see how incredibly intolerant the Saudis are of their own people. I mean, here the U.S. goes around criticizing Iran that your democracy is no good, that your elections are rigged. Are there elections in Saudi Arabia? Is there a president that gets elected? Is there a Congress or an assembly that gets elected? No way. And so the U.S. and Saudis, they're also internally, they're saying, come on, show that there's some reform, that you're doing something. And they said, okay, 2005, their first elections were for municipal councils that have absolutely no authority, no legislative power at all. They can say, well, we think maybe there should be some parks over here, and maybe trash collection should be done. They have no authority. These are the great elections that the U.S. touted as major reforms in Saudi Arabia. And, you know, you look at the Saudis who have stood up to say, maybe we should have some more democracy in Saudi Arabia. What happens to them? Beheadings. I mean, this is a country that still beheads people. It uses the death penalty, and the majority of the way it uses the death penalty is through beheadings. And you can get beheaded for all kinds of things. It can be for insulting Islam. It can be for spreading atheism. Are there any atheists in this room? God. Don't travel to Saudi Arabia.
Humanism. We traded God for humanism.
Yes, that's right. Well, atheism, punishable by death in Saudi Arabia. Any homosexuals? Homosexuality, punishable by death in Saudi Arabia. Are there any sorcerers in the room? We have 1, 2, 3 sorcerers in the room. Sorcery, punishable by death in Saudi Arabia. So you might know that there are some dissidents who become known because their cases have been taken up by groups like Amnesty, but there are thousands and thousands of political prisoners in Saudi Arabia. One of the people more well known is a young man named Raif Badawi. Anybody heard of him? A couple of you have. So he started a blog, and his blog was, we think there should be more humanism. He didn't say atheism, humanism. We think maybe we should have more discussions. We think maybe we should make room for free thinkers in Saudi Arabia. He was tried and sentenced to death, accused of spreading atheism. And then it was commuted, because there was a big outcry, commuted to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes. I mean, lashes. They still do this in Saudi Arabia. But to tell you how international opinion can influence them, they took the guy out, Raif Badawi, on a Friday afternoon. It's after Friday prayers. How religious. You take him out after Friday prayers, and you administer the 50 lashes. Somebody put it on a video. It got spread over the internet around the world. There was so much backlash that the next week came, and instead of taking him out for the lashes, they said, oh, he's still recovering from his wounds from the week before. And then the next week, he's still recovering from the wounds. It's been now a year. They luckily haven't taken him out for any more of the lashes, but he still has the 10-year prison sentence. And his lawyer, Walid Abu Khed, who was defending him and others, sentenced to 15 years in prison. So these are our allies. You've probably heard something about the issue of how women in Saudi Arabia are treated. Anybody got any ideas? What have you heard? Can they drive yet? No. But there was a pilot, actually, the first woman pilot. They made a big deal about it. The first woman pilot landed a plane in Saudi Arabia, but she still cannot drive a car. So, anything else you know about? And do you know why women can't drive?
They're incapable.
You sound like you actually believe that one.
They say they're incapable.
A distraction to men.
Distraction to men, yes. That's a good distraction to men. It might not be safe for them. And you know, when you dig a little deeper about why it wouldn't be safe for them. Because there might be some men that don't like seeing a woman drive, and they might drag her out of the car and beat her up. So why would you let her drive rather than arrest the guy who beat her up for driving? But there was also a fatwa that was issued that said women can't drive because it would be bad for her ovaries. Do you think that? What do you think of that?
Yeah, you get 1,000 lashes, it probably would affect it.
So they still can't drive. Anything else you know about women? Yeah.
It's my understanding that a girl only has to be 9 years old to be married.
Right, there
And
is
she
still...
doesn't need her parents' permission.
So that a girl can be 9 years old, it's at puberty, and that you don't need your parents' permission. You do. You need the permission of a guardian. And that is the basis of the oppression of women, is a guardianship system. That no matter your age as a woman, you have to have a male relative, and it's the father approval for every major thing in your life. And so even more than the driving thing, women want to get rid of the guardianship system. I do want to acknowledge that women have made a lot of gains in areas like education. You know, it used to be they fought for education. Finally, they said, all right, we'll educate you girls. Go to school and we'll teach you to read the Quran. That's your education. And the girls fought and said, we want education the same as the boys do. It's gender segregated. It's the most gender segregated country in the world. But at least girls have earned the right to have an education that is almost the same as the boys. 60% of the college students are girls. Women are getting a good education, and there's even a scholarship program for men and women that allow them to go out of the country to study if their guardian allows them to do so. But they've made a lot of gains. Of course, then the gains mean they want more, and so women are fighting and fighting and fighting for more. In the meantime, there are other groups of people who face tremendous oppression in Saudi Arabia. Anybody want to throw out another group of people?
Shiites.
The Shiites. So, Shiites are a minority in a Sunni majority country in Saudi Arabia. One might think, if you have a country that's a theocracy, it's based on religion, that would mean you respect people's religion. Right? No, not in Saudi Arabia. If it is not Wahhabism, if it is not the Sunni version of Islam, because you could be a Sunni and practice as a Sufi, and that's still discriminated against. You will be discriminated against. The Shia live, the majority of Shia live in the eastern part of the country. The eastern part of the country is also the oil-rich part of the country. So the Shia, by their right, should be the wealthiest people in Saudi Arabia, which they are not. And the Saudi government has, the Shia can't study in the schools their religion. It has to be the Wahhabi version. The Shia discriminated against in the job areas. The other religion. So, you know, you have to be a Muslim to be a Saudi citizen. But there are many people living in Saudi Arabia who are not Muslim. So why is that?
Because they bring in
Foreigners.
Right. Migrant foreign workers who are brought in to do the heavy work, the dirty work. A huge population that started coming in really when the Saudis started reaping massive amounts of money from the selling of oil, like in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. They started importing all of these workers from poor countries, from like India, Bangladesh, Philippines. And, you know, if you get a nice employer, you can make money and you can send it home and have a pretty good experience. But what if you have a lousy employer? Well, the system is called a sponsorship system, and you need a Saudi national to be your sponsor in order to get there. And that Saudi national is basically like your owner once you're there. They oftentimes even confiscate your passport, and if you find out, uh-oh, I was sold a faulty bill of goods, this is a horrible job, my employer stinks, they work me 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, they don't pay what they said they were going to pay, they barely feed me, I want to go home. You can't go home unless your employer gives you an exit stamp. Can't even go home. So I tell some horrendous stories in the book about what some of these employers do and how this is like modern day slavery on a massive scale in Saudi Arabia. So these are some of the things happening internally in the country. But then there is also the spread of Wahhabism around the world. So the Saudis took, the Saudi regime took a lot of the money, the billions of dollars they were making, and this all happened right after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Because the Saudis said, uh-oh, the Iranians look like they're standing up and saying, we are the guardians of Islam, and we're going to spread our version. And the Saudis said, uh-oh, we're going to get out there and we're going to show that we are the real guardians of Islam. And so they took the money, teachers and preachers, and they trained them and they sent them back and they pay their salaries. And they are there to spread their version of Islam. You might have even heard President Obama said that when he lived in Indonesia, it was this very wonderful, tolerant kind of Islam that was practiced. And then the Saudis started coming in, and people started noting the change that was happening. So this is happening in many places around the world. I've seen it myself when I was in Pakistan, along the border of Afghanistan. The anti-Western sentiment that came out of the schools that were run with Saudi money. And we see it in not only in the creation of groups like ISIS. You know that ISIS was so embarrassed. I mean, not ISIS was embarrassed. They don't get embarrassed. The Saudis were embarrassed when it turned out that ISIS was using Saudi textbooks in the area that they controlled, because the ideology of the Saudi regime is the basis of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and even the group in Nigeria, Boko Haram, got millions of dollars from the Saudis. If you look at the WikiLeaks cables that Hillary Clinton had, she was like tearing her hair out and saying, what are we going to do about these Saudis? They're funding all of these extremist groups and we can't stop them. And one time you might have even heard our wonderful Vice President Joe Biden, who sometimes just has to get out there and say it. And he said, the biggest problem are our allies like Saudi Arabia. And then he got back to the White House and got talking to, and he had to turn around and say, no, I didn't mean that, I didn't mean that. So here they are spreading the version of Wahhabism, and not just spreading the ideology. Also, if you look at what the Saudis did during the time of the Arab Spring. So during the time of the Arab Spring, two things were happening for the Saudis. One is they saw the influence of Iran spreading, and the other is they saw the influence of people rising up and asking for more democracy. And they said, uh-oh, we don't want either of these things happened. So what did they do? Well, in neighboring Bahrain, where there was an uprising against a dictatorship, a non-violent, beautiful, peaceful uprising, they went in and crushed it. And what did they do in Yemen, where there was an uprising as well, that turned into an internal conflict inside Yemen? The Saudis said, uh-oh, we're worried about Iranian influence, we're going to get in there and get involved. And just like the U.S. stupidly says, oh, we'll throw a couple of bombs and that'll be it and we'll win, the Saudis said, oh, we'll throw some bombs, we'll kill these Houthi rebels, and that'll be the end of it. Well, that was March of last year. And they've been bombing and bombing and bombing ever since. And now a poor country, Yemen, that was poor to begin with, has been decimated by the Saudis. There are thousands of innocent people who have been killed. You might have heard, do you remember the flap that happened with Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations, where they put Saudi Arabia on the list of countries that is killing children in its wars? And Saudi Arabia said, oh, you want to put us on that list? I think we'll withdraw the millions of dollars we're giving for children's programs around the world. They blackmailed the UN. And imagine, Ban Ki-moon got up there and he said, all right, we're taking Saudi Arabia off the list because we can't risk not having this money for all these other children's programs. But he was really pissed about it. So Saudi Arabia in Yemen killing children, destroying the country. Oh, and it just came out this week. There was a new study that was done by a group that looked at every single one of the airstrikes. It's about 8,633 from the time they started in March until the beginning of August. And they determined that a third of those airstrikes were civilian targets. So they've hit 4 or 5 Doctors Without Borders hospitals. They've hit school after school and marketplace and factories and infrastructure. They have turned Yemen into a catastrophe. And whose weapons did they use to do that? So really, just let that sink in. It's our weapons. So the more I looked into how much we had sold to Saudi Arabia, I'd say it's not just the weapons. It's weapons, it's logistical support. And you say, well, what kind of logistical support if a third of the strikes were civilian targets? And it's also diplomatic cover that we've given for this war in Yemen. And luckily, for the first time, there are people in Congress who are starting to stand up and say, maybe we should do something about this. And your congressperson, some of your congresspeople, who has Ted Lieu here as congressperson. So he has really been the most outspoken person in Congress on this issue. And he has said, by assisting Saudi Arabia, the United States is aiding and abetting what appears to be war crimes in Yemen. The administration must stop enabling this madness now. So, Congress, year after year after year, just approves these. This time, now they're saying, maybe we should do something about this. The administration announced a new round of weapons during recess, so Congress wouldn't be there, but they have by law 30 days to put a hold on the weapons sales. So Ted Lieu got 63 other colleagues to join, and in the Senate we have 4 senators who put out a resolution and are trying to get other senators to say, let's stop the weapons sales. And we are part of a very broad and exciting coalition trying to stop these weapons sales, because it's not just the usual peace folks, it's also people in the humanitarian aid community, in the refugee community. It's huge groups like the Red Cross and groups like the American Bar Association. We're not going to win this time around because the administration is just going to go ahead and sell these weapons, but it's a good fight that we're putting up, and it's starting to move us in the right direction. So I want to look at this issue of weapons sales in general. When I did the research for the book, I couldn't believe the amount of weapons that we have sold to Saudi Arabia just under the Obama administration. It's been $110 billion worth of weapons.
Jesus.
Just let that sink in. $110 billion worth of weapons. That is a massive amount of weapons. It's the largest weapon sales we've ever sold anywhere in the world. The Saudis are by far the #1 purchaser of U.S. weapons. The Saudis are propping up the military-industrial complex here in the United States. And it has got to stop. We have to do something about this. So I'm going to pass out, if we can pass out these cards here, like one on one side and maybe this on the other side. There's a simple number on here. It's the switchboard. You gotta get to Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein because they have not signed on to this call to stop the weapons sales. And if you have a congressperson who is not Ted Lieu, please call that congressperson. This madness has to stop now. Other things before we open it up to discussion. One is to say, why do we continue to be friends with this horrible regime?
Cheap oil.
So one was the oil, but you know what? We get only about 13% of our oil from the Saudis these days. It's a very small amount, thanks to the U.S. producing a lot more of its own oil, unfortunately through things like fracking. But we don't need Saudi oil anymore. We could buy that 13% somewhere else. Of course, we could start getting off of the oil economy and do something very different, but we don't need Saudi oil. So I mentioned the weapons sales. I think it's more an issue of being dependent on weapons sales to the Saudis than even oil these days. But then there's also the issue that Saudi money is now deeply entrenched in our economy in all kinds of ways. So there's lots of Saudi money in the U.S. stock exchange. There's lots of Saudi money in U.S. Treasury bonds. I think they're the only ones that buy U.S. Treasury bonds anymore. There's lots of Saudi money in Citicorp and all kinds of companies. How many of you have used Uber? Raise your hand. Come on, admit it. Admit it. The hands go up. Aside from any other problems of Uber, the Saudis invested $3.5 billion in Uber.
No.
So much money that it won them a seat on the board. And Jodie, I know Arianna Huffington is on the board as well, isn't she? And you tried to talk to her about this, and what did she say?
She said, oh, well, this is progressive for women. By letting them be in the car, then they're going to become drivers after that.
For the Saudis, this is about Uber actually being in Saudi Arabia is progressive for women because it helps them to then be in the car and then one day they might actually drive the car.
Yeah, but the lie is that they always had someone driving them. She thinks
Arianna Huffington thinks it's great that Saudis are investing in Uber and have a seat on the board in Uber. The Saudis, you might have heard, you might have heard that there's another bill in Congress that is supposed to allow the 9/11 families for the first time ever after almost 15 years to sue the Saudi government in U.S. courts. So Obama says he's going to veto that.
Yeah.
And then Congress has to decide, will they override the veto? But the Saudis said, oh, you're going to do that? Well, then we're going to pull out $750 billion from your economy, blackmailing the United States. So Saudi money intertwined in our economy. The other thing is what we call checkbook diplomacy. So unlike AIPAC, the lobby for the right-wing Israeli government in the United States, AIPAC has actually money and people and chapters and things. The Saudis don't have that, but they have a lot of Ivy League universities. I was just in New Haven. Yale Law School, $10 million from the Saudis. The law school, Saudi Arabia doesn't even have a constitution. They also give money to, quote, think tanks that could never exist in Saudi Arabia because they don't want to think. So think tanks, right wing, middle of the road, liberal ones, the Brookings Institute, Atlantic Council. And then there are some foundations that get Saudi money. Anybody think of a foundation that gets Saudi money?
Clinton.
The Clinton Foundation. Yes, the Clinton Foundation gets a lot of Saudi money. And so does the very sweet, lovely Jimmy Carter Center. And then there are, as I did this research, I was looking for the lobby groups, and I find in Washington, D.C., like registered foreign agents of the Saudi government. Who would want to do that? Well, there's 8 different firms in Washington, D.C. that are all doing that, all registered agents of the Saudi government. And one of my favorite ones is one called the Podesta Group. Anybody heard of a Podesta? Who is John Podesta?
Clinton's campaign chairman, isn't it?
He is the chair of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. He was also Bill Clinton's chief of staff. He also started the group Center for American Progress. And he and his brother Tony Podesta, thought, oh, we've got so many contacts in Washington, D.C., we might as well make a lot of money from it. Let's start a lobby group. So they started this lobby group, the Podesta Group. So John Podesta left it to work on Hillary's campaign or whatever else he's doing. Tony Podesta continues to be there. He is a major donor to Hillary Clinton. He's a major bundler to Hillary Clinton, and he gets $140,000 a month from the Saudi government.
Jesus.
I mean, is this gross or what? It's really gross.
Hey, Medea, isn't it also the case that the Saudis are working with Israel and they see as a check against Iran? So
the question is about Saudi's relationship with Israel. Nominally, they are enemies. I mean, the Saudis, they don't have diplomatic relations, and for Saudi's credibility in the Arab world, they have been supportive of the Palestinians. But recently, with the negotiating of the Iran deal, they have gotten closer and closer to each other, first with secret meetings, and then they said, oh, what the hell, let's just meet in public. So they've been meeting now publicly, and they both tried to work together to undermine the Iranian deal. They're still trying to undermine the Iranian deal. And with the idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, the Israelis and the Saudis are working quite closely together. So let's open it up, but I guess the last thing I just want to say is that this has gone on way too long. And the problem when I'm listing all these reasons about why we are in bed with the Saudis, the biggest one is because we haven't demanded otherwise. Yeah. We haven't built a movement that says we will not tolerate our government being in bed with the Saudis. We're building up a great movement now around the Israel-Palestine issue. But we have to build up a similar issue around Saudi Arabia. And we have to find all kinds of ways of doing that. And there are all kinds of ways. We should embarrass the hell out of anybody who's taking Saudi government money and force them to break contracts with the Saudi government, force them to return money from the Saudi government. We should have boycott campaigns around the Saudis. What would you boycott? I guess oil. Dates? We have to find different ways to do it. And I think as we look towards a new administration, the silver lining is that we have no illusions anymore, like some of us did around Barack Obama, right? No illusions. Whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. We might want Jill Stein, but I don't think under our system we're going to get her. So whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, we're going to have a hawk in the White House. We're going to have somebody who is too quick to use militarism. And the only way we're going to get something different is if we combine our movements, if we build our movements, if we see around the Saudi stuff that we are working with the environmentalists, because this is all about oil and this is all about the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex being the biggest polluter in the world. And we have to combine it with the Black Lives Matter and the people working to end the militarization of police in our own communities, because again, that is so related to the military-industrial complex. And we have to combine it with the issues of the Israel-Palestine issue. We have to combine it with water is life, because
water is life, and in 10 years you're going to be standing on this box and we're going to talk about why the availability of water is the problem. And
we have to recognize that the things that we are fighting for in our communities, and that we were so excited about when Bernie Sanders was running, and people were all, yes, we need to have free college education for any young person because they deserve it, and we need a Medicare for all system because we deserve it. And then they'd say, but where are we going to get the money? And he'd say, well, we'll tax the rich. And they said, but it doesn't add up. There's not enough money there. Well, we got to say the obvious. The obvious is the bloated military budget, and that's where we got to take the money from and invest it in the things that we need to rebuild our own country at home. And we'll never, ever be able to do that unless the people who rule this country are not arms dealers anymore. They're peacemakers, not arms dealers. So I want to end on a hopeful note that we have a chance now with the new administration because people are ready. Who here was at the Democratic Convention? Well, it was so exciting to be on the floor of the Democratic Convention when all of a sudden you started hearing this chant, no more war, no more war, and it went from the California delegation to the Oregon delegation to the next delegation to the next delegation, and the whole room was chanting, no more war, no more war. And it was beautiful to hear. And, that is just a manifestation of where people are in general. They're sick of these wars. They understand it hasn't made us safer. They understand it's robbed us from so much money that we need for so many things at home. So we just have to be better at organizing and better at reflecting that general sentiment and demand a government that reflects our values to use diplomacy and political solutions and get us the hell out of all these wars that we're in.
What's really interesting, Medea?
I'm from Belgium, and my parents, I have been here in 50 years. My parents have seen 2 wars. You Americans, you do not know what war is. That's right. There is no market with beautiful gallons of milk to buy, and butter, and vegetables. Nothing! Nothing! You have the siren. And you have to go with your little children in the underground. You do not know what is war. It's terrible.
You're right. That's right.
Trump is going to get you into big war.
That's right. Let's give a hand for this woman.
To let you know that it's no fun.
Yeah.
I am a single woman, and I said I will not get married and have children. I was born in 1942 in Belgium. I'm from Belgium, and my parents had to raise me in the middle of the British bombarding Belgium.
So we thank you for bringing it back home and making it real for us.
Okay, anybody is living in Pasadena?
Yeah. Okay, we have, Lauren wants to make a clarification about what happened at the Democratic Convention.
Yeah, I just wanted... I have a pretty loud voice, but...
You're doing a selfie?
Yeah, I'm Facebook Living this.
Oh.
Okay. So I just want to mention, because I was a delegate, and we came up with those chants in the California delegation. We disseminated them. It was also ban fracking now, no TPP, Black Lives Matter. And we had a mole in our group, and they got it over to the Hillary team, and the Hillary delegates were sent an email and a text to chant over us. The only thing they weren't supposed to chant over was Black Lives Matter. Then the instruction was chant with them. But what I found really ironic was they were supposed to, when we were chanting "No More War," they were supposed to chant over us USA. Okay, so I got chills because, you know, of course, USA is what they chant in Donald Trump rallies. And we have to wonder when the Democratic Party decided that no more war is a statement that they want drowned out.
Yeah, thank you for that
Yeah.
Comment and a question.
Yeah.
It was foreign policy to use the Wahhabism. Brzezinski said, what's a few stirred up Muslims versus the end of the Soviet Union? John McCain was in Riyadh in 2014 saying, thank God for Saudi Arabia, thank God for ISIS. And then, I have that quote there, then you know, they just released the 28 pages. Of course, there's Bandar bin Sultan, otherwise known as Bandar Bush, who made a $15,000 donation to the San Diego terrorists. I could maybe say that maybe he helped Bush by fomenting 9/11 and giving him his war in Iraq.
Who are these military industrialists that we need to call on? I would personally write a letter to every one of the board of directors that requests some real response. So who are they?
Well, there's one we want to focus on, and that's General Dynamics, because they are benefiting the most right now from these weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. It also happens that in the military-industrial world, they have broken the glass ceiling so that the CEO is a woman. And what?
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity, blood on her hands. And so that is one that we want to focus on. But unfortunately, you know, it's Northrop Grumman, it's Lockheed Martin, it's Raytheon, it's Boeing. I mean, these big ones are all the ones who make money.
Isn't it listed on James?
Yes.
James, what's the name of that?
Yeah, and I also list in the book the main ones who do it. And we do what? Do you want to say anything about the divestment campaign? I mean, we do want to get into. Maybe Chelsea should just say something.
Yeah. So we are targeting the weapons manufacturers, weapons industry at large itself. Like she mentioned, General Dynamics is our first target. Phoebe Novakovic is the name of the CEO there. She's also on the board at Northwestern, so we know that students, the future, has an opportunity to say that this is not a leader, that especially shouldn't be, a shareholder in such a large organization that's profiting from such chaos, destruction, and death around the world, shouldn't be profiting or shouldn't be fueling the future through her position at the board. So there's a big effort that's happening there, and we'll be in touch. I'll get you her email address so you can start with your letter writing campaign.
Yay!
Thank you. A quick comment in regard to, and then a question, a quick comment in regard to the bundling of allies. So one of the things that the Saudis also do is they destroy the history of Islam. So they have destroyed a lot of Medina and Mecca, and they are bombing, as you know, Sana'a. And they bomb specific sites because they want to wipe out the history of Islam and rewrite it according to Wahhabism. So to your earlier point about not being Islamophobic, this needs to be put forward into the light. The question I have is, in regard to, you mentioned Robert Greenwald. Before people know who the Kochs were, Robert Greenwald made a movie about them. And because of that, and your efforts, and other people's efforts, and your all's efforts, we now know who they are and how pervasive they are. So it's beyond oil, it's beyond the defense. It's about transparency, bringing it forward. So my question is do you see, and how can we more forthrightly bring forward and list where the Saudi influence is across the board, not just on the simple things like killing people, and I say simple because it's all too easy to do that, yeah, and the oil, but the more pervasive stuff that lasts for decades. Thank you.
Well, I think you have a great idea that we should get Robert Greenwald to do a film on Saudi Arabia. to your first point, we have been working with people who have been very upset about the way Saudis have been destroying the shrines, the holy sites, and one of the things that I found when I did the research for the book, do you know that it's a law in the United States called the International Freedom of Religion Act? From 1998, we have a law. And the law says that every year we're going to put out a study on which countries are the worst in terms of freedom of religion. And then we're going to apply sanctions to the countries that are the worst. So every year they do the study, and every year the Saudis come out down at the bottom, along with Burma and along with North Korea, as the worst. And every year those other countries get sanctioned. And every year the Saudis do not get sanctioned, because in 2004 the State Department, the diplomatic wing of our government, gave an indefinite waiver to the Saudis, so they would not be held accountable. So talking about the big tent, I think we could get a lot of people. We've got our atheists in the room here. Hello, atheists, right? We've got our Catholics in the room here. We've got our Jews right here. We've got our Muslims here. What else do we have? Some Methodists, some of those. That's not a religion. So we could do a big coalition that demands that the waiver be lifted for Saudi Arabia, right? That shouldn't be that hard to do. So if anybody wants to work on that, I would love to talk to you.
She was waiting.
Oh, NES, go where you go.
Didn't we destroy the sacred sites of the Indians, the Dakota pipeline here?
Yes.
We do it too.
I read your book. I was wondering, in the country, how did you do research? You went there clearly very often. How is it for a Western woman to travel there? And can you go back now?
So I was never allowed into Saudi Arabia. I tried to get in many times, not allowed in. We have been around Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Bahrain and all over, but the Saudis won't let me in. My partner Ty Barry is still on a mission to try to get me in under some cover. I just need a different passport if somebody wants to lend me one. But so I did it all through friends inside Saudi Arabia, and Saudis who are living here and Saudis who are living in Europe. So it really was a very collaborative effort and a wonderful, I had a great time working on the book because it put me in touch with all these fabulous people. And, one person would say one thing and another person would another. And so a Saudi woman that was working very closely with me here would put it out to her friends and relatives in Saudi Arabia and keep doing that until we finally got, the real facts. So a number of Saudis have read it, and they haven't told me anything that's not true in there. So I'm sure there are things that I will learn that maybe are not exact anymore. And things are changing, but that's how it worked.
That's okay, Medea. You can still get into congressional hearings.
Sort of.
Can you talk about the youth and what you've learned about the youth in Saudi Arabia? Because I did some research about kids and music and how they have to play music in deep basements and they can't be caught doing anything that has to do with music or fun or dancing.
So everything in Saudi Arabia is hypocritical. If you are a prince, if you have a lot of money and are close to the Saudi family, you can do whatever you want. You can play your music, you can have your cocaine, your liquor, your prostitutes, your whatever, and you can get away with it. If you're a normal Saudi, it is illegal to be playing music, it is illegal to be dancing, it's illegal to have alcohol, it's illegal to do any of these other things. In the more progressive, there are some parts of Saudi Arabia that it's a little looser. In the back roads of Saudi Arabia, it's much worse. There's religious police They go around and force you to close your store, to pray 5 times a day. Women are forced to be covered up. If you're not covered up, you can be arrested. But the youth. Saudi Arabia is one of the few countries where there is a booming young population. And there is growing unemployment. And so the young people are getting very restless. Saudi used to be more of a welfare state where there was a lot of money and they would subsidize a lot of things. Now with the price of oil going down, they can't be as generous to the Saudi citizens. And so young people are having a hard time getting employment. The government is now trying to throw out a lot of the migrant workers to make way for the Saudi young people to get a job, but employers don't want to hire them because they don't think they're going to work as hard, and they would have to pay them more. So it's a very tough time for the youth inside Saudi Arabia. That's why a lot of them are voting with their feet and leaving the country. There is quite an exodus of young people.
Where do they go?
They go to Europe, they go wherever they can go. I mean,
You're right,
Saudis would tend to have more money than other people and would be able to go on vacations and then overstay their visas kind of thing. Or they go to neighboring Bahrain and they go to neighboring Oman and they go to other countries. You know, if you go just right across from Saudi Arabia to Bahrain, Ty, you want to tell them what it's like in Bahrain?
It's Gomorrah. There's prostitution, there's lots of liquor, there's drugs, and then they take a causeway over from Saudi Arabia, and that's where they go to party. When we were staying in a hotel, we saw them coming in, and they would just have major parties in these hotels, and then they go back across the causeway back into Saudi Arabia. And at the same time, Saudi Arabia sent thousands of troops into Bahrain to stop the Arab Spring in Pearl Square in Bahrain, to stop the people from having democracy in the country that's being run by the royal family Khalifa.
Yeah, they like to use it as their party place.